best-selling books. What things soever ye desire when ye pray, believe that ye receive them, and ye shall have them. So we're talking about prosperity in this class. And the term being, prosperity is the state of flourishing, thriving, success, or good fortune. Prosperity often encompasses wealth, but also includes other factors which are independent of wealth to varying degrees, such as happiness and health. Now, from the metaphysical perspective, the process of making money is an extension of the drive for nutrition. The drive for nutrition is what in animal and other form moves us to seek both nourishment as well as nourishment for offspring and shelter. So basically, the process of earning money is the way that we do that in a, post-industrial society. It's actually been a lot longer than that we've been using money to be a symbol for this process of gaining nutrition. Now, Zane in Laws of Occultism says that basically all of life is part of the process of capture, storage, and release of energy. So we're going to look at money from that perspective. And in order to have good financial health, we basically need to be able to capture money, which is our process of making money. We have to be able to store it. Otherwise, we have no reserves to fall back on in difficult times. And we also have to be able to spend it, or we become economically constipated. And there needs to be pleasure associated with each of these steps of the process. An important thing here is also to know what money actually is. So we talked about this in the first class as money being a medium of exchange. It's used in payment for goods and services, as well as for the repayment of debt. Generally, money is in the form of stamped coin and printed bills. This is what we're familiar with, even though this is other people's money, other national currencies. It's, it basically comes in two forms that we know it, though now there is, of course, credit cards and electronic transfers and money we don't ever quite touch or grasp or get to see. So where did this process come from? Basically, early humans hunted and gathered what they needed, trading with neighboring tribes for luxury items. That's very apparent here in New Mexico. The process of trade and the trade routes were quite extensive through this state and through the economic system. The oldest mining in the continental U.S. was done here. If you are ever driving north to Santa Fe, right before you hit La Cienega, you'll see these volcanic cones out to the east of the highway. And that area, known as Los Cerrillos, the hills, actually have the mining has gone on there for 10,000 years. The turquoise mined from those hills was sent as far south as Tenochtitlan, the capital of the Aztecs. So if you're ever down in Mexico and go to the Museum of Anthropology, you'll see masts covered in turquoise. Chances are that is Cerrillos turquoise. And here You'll see petroglyphs of parrots and macaws. Even the people of Acoma and other tribes still use parrots in designs on their pottery, even though they no longer raise parrots. But parrots were traded northward from Mexico along with little copper bells, and in exchange for the turquoise. So that's one way. People used to trade items. I'll give you my cow for your magic beans. There's another way, and throughout history, cultures have also used conquest as a means to exact resources from other groups of people. This is somewhat frowned upon, but I was, a couple months ago, watching a DVD on the Greeks and their mythology, and what I found very interesting is the narrator referred to the ancient Greeks as being adventurers, which basically meant that they went, because their own island culture had very scarce resources, they went into other people's cultures and basically pillaged them. So the expansion of the Alexandrian Empire really came from this method of acquiring wealth. But we still see that happening in the city, whether it's in the form of bank holdups, carjackings, purse snatchings, etc. That is another way by which people come by their supply. Now, as early civilizations evolved out of herding and sedentary agricultural communities, the barter system expanded. The first currency evolved in ancient Egypt and Mesopotamia, and it came from two basic innovations. What you see here is a clay pouch with cuneiform designs. And inside there were little cones, cylinders, and balls, each representing a different numerical unit. And basically, they were counting devices. This was sort of like an invoice to make sure that what was actually sent to you actually arrived. You could go in and say, oh yeah, there were 5 bushels of grain and 3 goats. They didn't get, pilfered along the way. So it was basically much like providing the packing slip with the goods. And this was how money started to evolve. Later, silver ingots were used. And they represented, because these were grain cultures in Egypt and Mesopotamia, they represented a certain value of grain, which was paid in taxes and or tributes to the temple system. Coins were eventually developed, and the value of the coin was determined by the type of metal it was made from. So, gold, large purchases, payment of the military, backing of state activities. Silver, large but common transactions, a unit of account for taxes, dues, contracts, and fealty. And copper was basically everyday transactions. I'm bringing this up because later in today's class and next week, we're going to talk about looking at gold and silver and the symbols in a chart that inform us about that, large purchases and small purchases. The Chinese gave us both paper as well as paper money. Now, of course, our word paper comes from papyrus, which is the paper. It's a Greek word, but it denotes the paper that was made by the ancient Egyptians by pounding the fibrous material of the papyrus stalk together. But pulp paper, which is the paper we know now, and a form of that is used in making paper money. That was actually a Chinese invention about 500 AD. Why paper money? Do you know how the Chinese carried their money? It had these holes in the center. They carried them on cords, which meant a really wealthy man was carrying a whole lot of weight. You had to have your servants carrying this around for you. So this paper money became, again, a symbol for the metal money, which was a symbol for something else. Money is basically a symbol for exchange of energy. And Samara and I were talking last week and the week before about how there are some economic systems that are groups which are moving back towards the barter system rather than using the symbolic intermediary of money as the unit of exchange. So this is what happened. Basically, money replaces this barter system. We're no longer, swapping fish. Could you imagine the smell in this room if you came and offered up fish tonight for class? And it's regulated by the government, which either prints or mints money. A few other concepts of money that we need to take into account before we look at astrological factors, which is basically supply and demand, simple economics. You have to keep in mind, if you're going to make money, there actually has to be a demand for either what you do, the services you provide, or for the goods which you provide. Growing up in California, I can remember times where the orange farmers would be dumping pickup trucks full, or even larger than that, dump trucks full of oranges by the side of the road because the market was such that there was not a demand for their crop. The other thing is, to make money, other people have to be willing to part with their money for it. And there's several things that factor into that process. Not only is it something they have to desire, but they have to desire what you have enough to part with their money. One of the factors is the more reasonably priced your goods or services, the more likely others will exchange their money for it. There's always a big fuss whenever they put up Walmart in somebody's neighborhood. And who's still making money? Walmart is. That family is among the members of that family rank among the richest Americans. And why? With their advertising, there's always this price slashing. So you go in to get something cheap and you pay more for something else. But it is this, illusion that you're getting, more bang for your buck. All right, and in these hard financial times, it's especially important to keep in mind that what people will part with their money first is necessities, unless they're addicts. And then that comes first. And there's plenty of people making money in that field.
Wouldn't it be also something to dig them out of their hole? That's also would be seen as a need sometimes. More in that situation.
Yeah, something that could be a tool or an investment.
Right.
The other thing to keep in mind, which I find many people do not, many employees do not, many business people forget the other person's point of view. And if you want to make money, actually you can never do that. Why? Just about the only way we make money, unless we have inherited or we have great investment somehow, is for all of us, our money comes from other people. There is somebody who's writing your paycheck if you are employed. And if you are self-employed, then there are probably many people who are writing your paycheck, because whoever uses your services is becoming that boss or that source of income for you. Merely wanting someone to pay for your goods and services is not sufficient enough to make them want to do so. This is what we encounter when we get telephone salespeople or go to trade shows, and you deal with high-end salespeople where their one goal is to make the sale, regardless of whether or not you need two left shoes. You know, they're out to sell it. But many people forget that somebody will only buy your goods or services if they want or need them. People part with their money if they are getting what they want, and they will be even more ready to part with their money if they like you. You know, think of going to a restaurant, and you know, if you get a pleasant waiter or waitress and somebody who's attentive versus somebody who's surly and ignores you and leaves you waiting for long periods of time. When it comes time to tipping, how many of you always give 15 or 20% regardless of the service? And how many of you may give more or less according to service? Yeah, the majority of people will do that. So if we like someone, if we feel we're being served, we're more inclined to part with our money. So basically, to get money from others, you have to fulfill their desires.
Could I make a quick point?
Mm-hmm.
Because in all this, obviously, is sometimes people might recognise that they're getting what they need and want. And so it's got to be, they've got to be able to identify, or it's got to be presented in such a way that they can identify it as something they need. Do you know what I mean? Like sometimes it will be what they need, but it mightn't seem appealing to them because they may not know it.
Right, and I think that process of pleasure is very important. And pleasure is what makes something appealing to us. And then there's entitlement, which is something one encounters a lot these days. I think many of the people born in the 80s and 90s suffer from this. And that is the belief that one has an inherent right to certain benefits that are not necessarily based on exchange. Has anybody ever encountered someone like this? Yeah. Well, basically nature works on the law of exchange. And if you've encountered this and have been repelled by it, chances are you're a healthy person. So the other question one always has to ask, and this is part of keeping the other person's point of view in mind, is what am I willing to do to make money? All of this is leading up to astrology. Most all of us know someone who, in spite of himself or herself, has become wealthy. I knew quite a few back in the 80s and 90s during the dot-com boom, where, you know, suddenly these people who you knew were workers one week actually had, you know, $1 million in stock options. So, keep this in mind. Intelligence and unusual ability do not guarantee the ability to make money. I know many talented artists who are starving artists. You know, their exceptional genius does not necessarily mean they can make money. Yeah. You're from Oklahoma. Do you know any people with oil money? Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
Young tart. Exposed her. She's been outed. Yeah, was there any unusual talent or ability in place? No. No. I mean, come on, when I was a kid, you know, what was that? Let me tell you a story about a man named Jed. Now he really kept his family fed. You know, it's like that. You just don't know when you're going to have this strike of fortune. I grew up in Los Angeles, and I know people who bought homes for, you know, $26,000 in the 60s, whose homes are now valued in the millions. That's a huge markup. And there was actually no unusual talent in that. Then there's the other side of this story. You know, if you bought a house in 2005, chances are it's now worth 20% less than what you paid for it. And I hear stories every day about people who are upside down on their mortgages.
Now, that also happened in the gold rush. Before that rush, there were people literally making millions. But after that rush, people were losing their shirts.
Yeah. Now, there's any number of people without any unusual talent that may have bought a Powerball ticket, you know, just by chance they went to fill up their gas tank. Hasn't happened to me yet. But, you know, where was the talent in that? And there are other people. Oprah Winfrey, Steve Fawcett, Bill Gates have actually applied themselves towards becoming wealthy. The great majority of wealth in this country is gained through inheritance. So there's not an unusual talent there. But that is how the majority of wealth is gained. But there are other people that definitely stand out in our culture or society because they've actually done something unusual or been in the right place at the right time to make a fortune. And these are just 3 examples.
Am I understanding that is right, that their objective was to make money? I don't know. I mean, as a primary thing, I always thought Oprah's thing was more directly about the passion for doing whatever it was.
Which is great, and that's a very key lesson.
Yeah.
And which is something that we might look at over time, which is even setting out to make money doesn't guarantee you're going to make it.
But I don't know whether she had that idea. That's what I'm trying to say.
No, but she did have.
At the beginning?
Sure, she was trying to feed herself.
No, but that's not about wealth. There's a difference about survival.
She started at a small radio station and worked her way up.
Right.
It was all
So
about
her
money.
objective-
Right now, if it, it's
but,
still all
but
about
hang
money.
on. Yeah, I'm not talking about money. I'm talking about wealth. There's a difference.
Really?
Well, wealth, I think, is a surplus of money.
That's right. Yeah.
So, and most of us feel kind of happy if we can just, you know, make our ends meet and have something left at the end of the month.
Yeah.
But wealth is just having a surplus, and that's actually something we'd all like to have. And these people, I do know that Steve Fawcett set out to make money. Oprah, she probably started out to make money. She may not have started off with the fantasy of being wealthy,
Yeah,
but
that's what I
I
was
imagine.
Figure it out.
Now, another thing that we have to factor in looking at an astrological chart is, why do some people go into business for themselves and succeed and others fail? There are some people who do better working for others, and there's some people I know that they're fired every 3 months. That they have, for whatever the reason is, working for others does not suit them as well. Or it doesn't suit their bosses as well. This is something we see a lot these days. There are some people succeeding in real estate. There are others losing their homes daily now. I've known people to make it big in speculation, and I've also known others to lose, and I've known other people who go through alternate losses and gains in the stock markets. So we're asking a lot of why. We're whining right now. Business partnership. Some people actually excel when they hook up with another person. And there are other people where they go into partnership with another person and they lose their shirt. That person brings them down. All right, Zane has an answer to all these whys. And that is, the explanation of this lies in the extra physical power of the thought cells within man's astral body. These thought cells have been built by experiences before human birth. These experiences and experiences after human birth have endowed them with energy and given them desires. They work from the inner plane with such energy as they can acquire to bring into the life the conditions and events, including abundance or poverty of money, that they desire. So there's something working within the subconscious mental organism, something operating within the soul that does have a determinate factor in this process of wealth or poverty. Another thing we have to remember, and I talked about this in the first class, from the anthropological point of view, if your civilization has survived, you're a success. So, adaptability becomes the key for survival. Financial crash of 1929 had a devastating effect on many previously prosperous individuals. Some of them were jumping out windows on Wall Street. And the current financial collapse has left very few persons untouched. So, other factors that we have to keep in mind is there are also environmental factors that can impact a person's wealth, be it war, natural disasters, obsolescence. All right. Zane goes on to say, do not expect, therefore, to be able to make money in any line you fancy. Even the biggest money makers are unable to do this, but they have found, perhaps by bitter experience, in which lines they are fortunate and which unfortunate. Instead of choosing at random or without guidance, see to it, therefore, that the type of your efforts and your environment are such as attract rather than repel wealth. Does anyone know what that is?
Keeping those, yeah.
You know? 100 years ago, yeah, 25 cents. You could find these on every continent. It was that big of a fad. So, vinyl records, 8-track stereo, pet rocks, beta video. There are also things that go into obsolescence, so we have to keep in mind that there is some relativity to products at certain times. Everyone made money in all of these things at one time. What happened to all the blockbusters in town? I think there's one left. Yeah. There you have the answer. I never noticed. Right, you know, Netflix came in delivering DVDs to your door at no late charges, and you know, it'd be obsolescence set in. A whole new system came about. Now I know many of you in this room can recognize that item. Do any one of you own one of these?
I think we've got one on home.
All right. Yeah, that, certainly I grew up with one that almost looked like that. And then there were later models, and then electric models, and then they were replaced by word processors, and then the PC came in. Also, when I was a child, we did not get ice. We actually had refrigeration. But my father and mother got ice.
We got milk.
Oh, yeah.
Yes.
And
We
bread.
got milk.
We used to get
Milk and bread was delivered, and there were even
butter and eggs.
butter and eggs, and there were people that drove through the neighborhood that were greengrocers also.
We would people newspaper people on the corners too. You know, sell their newspapers.
They still do that in Santa Fe.
Oh, really?
Mm-hmm.
We do,
Oh, that's what they
Sell
do.
newspapers on the street corner.
At
Oh, yeah,
certain times of
yeah,
day,
we
yeah.
do that in Santa Fe.
Yeah, I know it sounds like the good old days, but, you know, supermarkets came in. I remember early supermarkets as a child, and the bread man, and all of that over time slowly disappeared. It can only be known in which departments of life the thought cells are harmonious enough to attract money, and in which departments of life they are so discordant that every move will bring financial loss. Through an analysis of the birth chart, and it is much better if one is able to make this analysis for oneself. So, the thing you all came here to understand. Harmonious planets attract wealth. The first thing that should be thoroughly understood is one cannot make money from those things that astrologically correspond to discordant groups of thought cells within his astral body. A careful study of the birth chart will reveal which thought cells were discordant at birth, and probably remain so unless a systematic effort has been made to change them. To make money from the things indicated by the astrological factors, mapping thought cells should be reconditioned. Mapping these thought cells would require that the desires of these thought cells should be reconditioned. It is possible within limits to do this, but it is usually far more profitable to devote the energy among those things towards which, from birth, there have been powerful and harmonious thought cell desires. All right, in the astrological chart, we have what is called the Trinity of Wealth. This embraces houses 2, 6, and 10. All right, the second house. This reveals to us what one's life experiences will be, where money, finance, income, one's outflow or spending habits, relationship to your personal possessions, what might be considered collections, assets, but also one's values. One's value system is determined by the second house. So what we're doing is we are looking at any planets that fall in the second house. Now one can guess the more planets there, the greater volume of energy that's being stimulated in this area that has to do with wealth.
I have a question about that one.
Mm-hmm.
Can the second house refer to a really broader concept of resources?
Yes.
All right. And what kinds of things could be included in that broader concept? How far can that be stretched?
It's anything you own.
So there's nothing about like your time or your energy as resource.
Well, it is if you're receiving something in exchange for that.
Okay. So then, all right. Okay.
The resources of others is indicated here. The resources that come through gambling, speculation, the stock market is indicated here. And then the assets of sort of the group, the community, the friends is indicated in that area of your chart. But truly, the second house, since we've moved from, most of us have moved from primarily a barter-based system, your fish, your grain, your necklaces, your fabric you've been weaving, if you were a barter person, all of that would be your goods, your assets. Now, the thing is, to make money, it's easier if there are powerful thought cells here. And you heard the term thought cells used in 3 of the quotes by Zing. And thought cells, each of the planets represents a thought cell. If it's the sun, it's a power thought cell. The moon, it's a domestic thought cell. Mercury's intellectual. Venus is social. Mars is aggressive. Jupiter's religious. Saturn is a safety thought cell. Uranus, individualistic. Neptune, utopian. And Pluto, universal welfare. So the more thought cells that are stimulated here, the more energy that is focused into these, this ability to capture, store, and release resources. Now, some of us don't have any planets there. And what we have to then do is look to the sign which falls on the cusp of that house, and the planet and or planets, in the case of if you have Scorpio, Aquarius, or Pisces on the cusp, you have dual rulerships. And then we have to look at where they fall in the chart, their relative power, and the aspects received by those planets.
So if you put 2 signs within a house,
An intercepted sign?
Well, yeah. So it kind of started in the last degree with, say, Scorpio, that most of the house was filled with the next sign.
We only look to the sign on the cusp. Unless you have an intercepted sign, which means you could have Scorpio. If you were born in a far southern latitude or a far northern latitude, then there's a chance that you have an intercepted house, which you could have Scorpio on the cusp, the entirety of Sagittarius in that sign, and then you have the first few degrees of Capricorn on the third house cusp. Then you also look to Jupiter, the ruler of Sagittarius. But because the house is intercepted, there is no cusp on that sign. It's much weaker influence.
Can I ask a question?
Yes.
So, you have the sign on the second house cusp. Okay, so my chart's Capricorn, so then I'd look to where Saturn is sitting in the chart.
Exactly.
Okay, but what about the natural ruler of the second house, which would be Venus, no?
Right.
Can you look there too?
To some degree, because why? Wherever Venus falls in your chart, you attract
Yeah.
gratuities.
Yeah.
So that will give you some indicator. But we actually really want to look at the direct thought cells associated with that particular, with your chart, with your house.
So if you don't have any planets in the two houses next to it of like, what would be the next one you went over to?
Well, actually, you take your finger out this line, and you look to see what sign's on the cusp.
There is none. So the next one goes up to...
Actually, you'll have to have a sign on the cusp. Do you recognize that symbol?
Leo.
Very good. So we would say, oh, here's your second house,
Okay.
Cancer.
Yeah.
So the moon rules your second house. You'll need to take a note of that, because we're going to do some in-class work tonight. All right, house number 6. This area of the chart, part of the Trinity of Wealth, indicates, among other things, our life experiences with work, employment, service. It represents our workplace, our colleagues and coworkers, or our employees, and our persons who are in service to us.
Sorry to go back to that previous one, but with the assets, are they only physical, tangible assets, or can they be intellectual assets, talents, those sort of things that can be marketable?
I think it would, the sign on the cusp or the planets in the house would determine whether they were, intellectual property or not.
Oh, okay. Yeah, so that would be, you don't have to look at your own particular...
Yeah, you might have Mercury in that house, and your ideas might be your wealth.
That would be the interpretation of that.
Uranus could be there, and your inventions might be your wealth.
Right, I see.
So, basically, the 6th house is a good indicator of our employability. Chances are, if this house is strong and harmonious, you could be somebody who always attracts in employment opportunities. If the house is weak and discordant, you might be that person who every 3 months is signing up at the unemployment department and or looking for other work, because to many degrees it represents our employability. The 6th house in your chart also to some degree indicates, keep in mind, we discussed earlier that people will part with their money if they like you. People will also keep you in their employment if they like you. If they don't like you, then they are looking for every opportunity to legally remove you from their premises.
But my 6th house is the least in power, and I'm always staying employed for long periods of time.
Yeah.
Right.
I never had trouble finding a job.
How is the harmony of that house?
5.13.
So it is harmonious. Although weak, it is harmonious.
No, so,
Yeah. There is a need for you. And this was a case of employment that's in demand. The type of work you do is definitely needed. And, I imagine if you won the lottery, you'd quit work tomorrow. Because with a weak 6th house, there isn't a huge desire or compulsion to work. Because it's harmonious, you've been lucky enough to have long-term employment and to always be able to find employment. And part of that is through choosing a field that's very much in demand. Partially that field's in demand because there's an enormous burnout rate among social workers. I have known plenty in my life. And you could be one. It's working its magic.
So where would you start deciding that planets were weak? How far down? Or would you be looking at it in terms of, because there's mid-range.
I'd start at the bottom and go up. If it's like 2.5%,
You'd call
I'd call that
that
weak.
weak, but
Yeah.
then when you get to the mid-range, you wouldn't necessarily call that weak. Okay.
In fact, let's term that mid-range. I like that description. All right. In the Trinity of Wealth, well, going back, I didn't actually finish my concepts here. Planets in the sixth house can indicate not necessarily the type of employment we're going to get involved in, but it can indicate our attitudes towards employment and the relative ease or the relative difficulty by which we achieve employment. It also, part of having work, depending on the type of industry in which you work, teamwork can be essential. So the ability to be compatible with colleagues and coworkers in some fields is considered essential, and this house can indicate. Do you end up liking your colleagues and coworkers? Do you get along with them? Do they respond well to you or with you? So there's indicators in this house that give us clues, not only to our employability, but the degree of pleasure or displeasure that we experience in our workplace. And then the 10th house, the last house in the Trinity of Wealth, is basically what we call career, vocation, our professional life. It has to do with our public standing in the form of honor, reputation, credit, and our ability to attract status, awards, recognition is indicated by the 10th house. It also indicates our relationship with authority figures, what would be bosses or our superiors.
When you say vocation, are you referring to it as the broadest understanding of it, like it could be paid or unpaid, and it would be what some people would call in religious
Your life's
things,
mission, your cosmic
like your
work.
calling.
Yes.
Yeah.
We'll talk about that next
Okay.
week. That's next week's class. So, 10th house is key because keep in mind, again, at times in work, one also needs to be noticed. If in a workplace you're doing a tremendous load of work, but your supervisor isn't aware of that, you may get overlooked for promotions or other such things. And the person who's doing a great job at beating their own drum or informing their supervisors as to, every time they cough, might get more attention. So our ability to attract attention is indicated here in the 10th house. The planets that fall there do not necessarily represent the career we will choose, but they will represent our attitudes towards the career which we choose and the type of experiences that are attracted through public and our reputation. All right, in your piles there are sample charts. I'm actually going to hand out.
Is that where you got old projector from? You looking ahead of the charts?
What's that?
Is that where you got old from?
Oh, no, it was just mentioning those examples earlier on. Christopher, with the thing about attracting attention, you could look at other places to see how much you put yourself forward and where your self-promotion opportunities are.
Yes, and we'll talk about that too at some point over the next week or so. All of these things that you think of, okay, I have somewhere in my mind to discuss. All right. Let's just look at this from becoming acquainted with the chart and talking about the Trinity of Life. Which houses are involved in the Trinity of Life? 2, 6, and 10. Would we say that the Trinity of Life is active in this chart?
Serious. Of life or wealth?
Excuse me, Trinity of Wealth.
Okay.
Thank you for remaining alert and awake. The Trinity of Wealth. Okay, what do we have? We have Venus, the Sun, and Mercury in the 2nd house. Jupiter in the 6th house. Neptune and Saturn in the 10th house. That is 6 planets out of a possible 10 are falling in the Trinity of Wealth. So if I flip the page over and look under the summary of the Astrodyne report, where it says Trinities, we look at the Trinity of Wealth, 45% of her energy is focused here in finance, employment, reputation. So there's a sure indicator there, and it's harmonious. So let's talk about her 2nd house. On the cusp is the sign of Aquarius. Aquarius has 2 rulers, and they are
Uranus and
Saturn. So Saturn and Uranus are going to also have an impact over her house of money. We consider them co-rulers. In a chart, the chief ruler is the planet closest to the cusp of that house. In this case, Venus. What does Venus do in the house of money?
Attracts.
Venus attracts. Yes. We say wherever Venus falls in your chart, you have gratuities. Things come to you with a certain degree of ease. Venus is the social urges, so what can be a key factor in her ability to make money?
attract lots of people to her.
Attract lots of people, and we certainly know that she has viewers. And I've only seen Oprah she's been on what, for a decade or so? 20 years, okay, well, and all that. You know, I must watch Oprah about once every 3 years, so, because I think I've seen Oprah 5 times. I'm not the world's biggest television watcher, and definitely not daytime TV, but what I have noticed about Oprah, primarily from the promos that she does for her show, is quite frequently she's inviting friends on the show. You know, which rank among the rich and famous. So again, Venus is the social urges, and being able to utilize one's friends, being able to have charm, being able to be attractive adds to the ability to make money. What about the sun in the second house? How does that operate?
That's about temple, personal, not esteem, but honor.
It is about esteem.
Yeah.
If you have the sun in your second house, then your self-esteem is tied up with making money. You actually measure your self-worth according to the numbers at the bottom of your bank account monthly. When those numbers are large, you feel better about yourself. When those numbers are low, you don't feel as good about yourself. So the person with the sun in the second house, their sense of worth is strongly tied up in their ability to make money, make decisions with money, and to develop assets. It becomes a very personal process. What about Mercury? She works in a field of communications. But Mercury is also the planet of thought. So if Mercury falls in your second house, you will spend a good deal of your mental energy thinking about your wealth, your assets, and or your value systems. Now, all of these fall in what sign? Can anyone recognize that? Aquarius. So what are other... Humanitarian, yeah. There's going to be something, although we can see there's extraordinary energy here in the chart towards the acquisition of wealth. This is going to be conditioned by the sign in which the planets fall. And this impacts the way we think of Oprah. When we think of Oprah, what are we thinking of? You know, girls' schools in South Africa and giving cars to needy teachers.
You know, the thing about values, that's such a big thing for her, because she really shapes values. I mean, that's really something of the ground of what she does in a way. I'm just a bit surprised. I never thought about values being the second house.
Can't Aquarius also be unique insights?
Yeah.
And isn't she, and she likes, she likes trying to make people understand, see themselves, open up their self-understanding and trying to, she would guess on and try to give them.
Yeah, the key word is I know. So there's definitely, her process of making money is also going to be through evolving humanity and or bringing a greater sense of knowledge and awareness to others. So we can see, we're actually seeing astrology at work. What about the influence of Saturn and Uranus upon her second house?
Neptune,
Aquarius has two rulers, Saturn and Uranus. Uranus is the modern ruler.
Well, I think there's very unique ideas in many areas.
Uranus, yeah.
Yeah.
Unique ideas. It falls across the chart and in the 7th house of partnerships and alliances. So my guess is part of her money-making skill is also the fact that she's brought very talented partners into the process with her. She will have, handlers, managers, representatives that have an impact.
Is 7 projects, or is it another house?
I think of 7 as people,
So it's
and
their
all of the
relationship.
other people in your life that you're in relationship with. Yes.
How much does the fact that Pisces is in that house figure in? It's about 12 degrees of Pisces.
And there's nothing in there. There's no planets in
All right,
Pisces.
so the fact that the house, wouldn't some of the Pisces,
Not in our
subtopics-
system.
Oh, okay.
Not in our system. We would associate Pisces only with the third house. Okay, and then Saturn. Saturn falls up in the 10th house of reputation, honor. Well, what's interesting is she has a really good reputation, for the most part. Even though her 10th house is very powerful, it's second in power after her second house of money, but it is slightly distorted. And her second house is strong, but also discordant. So here's an example of somebody who has discord in their chart, but who has had great accomplishment. And if we go back to the topic of our first class, being the value of pleasure and pain as nature's educator, oftentimes areas that we have to struggle in are the areas that we ultimately acquire skill. To an outsider, it may look like Oprah's just fabulous and has money. But if one knew her and sat down to talk with her, she might be able to tell stories about all she had to go through to get to where she was. And it may not have seemed, to be a time to change the tape. We're going to take a brief